I want to start out this video by saying sometimes learning information, fancy graphics, and high production value is great. But for the sake of this video, the format of just some guy walking outside on a beautiful windy day conveys a sort of personal message because this topic is deeply personal to me. I'm just going to get right into it. A lot of Gen Z people feel a lot of different things, but one thing we can all agree on is things are different. The world our parents and especially our grandparents grew up in, whether we like it or not, whether we want to return to that period or learn from it, regardless of how you feel, it's a time I don't think we're going to get back to, regardless of how hard we try. And I think that that's a difficult topic to get into because it's harder to get a job. People are worried about AI and a bunch of other computer technologies. And there's overall just a sense of almost helplessness, despite having some of the most resources we've ever had in human society. It almost seems like an obstacle rather than a liberating factor. Now, I'm guilty, of course, just like many other people, of what is called the golden age fallacy, and that is idolizing and romanticizing a time in which I didn't exist, and maybe only hear sugar-coated aspects of it. At least for me, that's right around end of World War II to the beginning of the 70s, so mid-century of the 20th century. And as we know, that's not a perfect time. The civil rights movement definitely showed us that we as Americans still needed to work on a lot of things, and of course we still do. We've come a long way, mostly for better. But that was also a time period of unprecedented economic growth, technological advancement, social advancement, but also things were simpler and easier, which is something that we're always going to hear people say when looking at the past. But at least in terms of other decades, it seems like when you remember the 50s and some of the 60s, you imagine a lot of people smiling outside with a glass of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or their favorite soft drink, smiling and overall being happy. And when you imagine a lot of people in the 2010s and especially early 2020s, like me, you probably imagine a lot of them frowning behind a screen, sitting in a hoodie with a vape. Granted, vapes are the new cigarettes. But the idea of a lot of things have changed. As mentioned before, things are different. But when you ask your grandparents and potentially ask them about their parents, a lot of them will say that a multitude of different things, of course. Everybody's experience is different, regardless of what time you live in. But you also know that, at least in comparison to a lot of Gen Z and other people, it seemed like their life started earlier. And what I mean by that is a lot of these milestones that we feel like we have to hit, they hit at what feels to Gen Z as an earlier time point. They were working with a steady job by their early 20s. They were married and potentially had one or even more kids by the time they hit their mid to late 20s. And by the time they were in their 30s, it feels like they had most of their life either already done, planned out, or just had things mapped out. And as someone in my early 20s and a lot of friends in their early to mid 20s and some in their late teens, it just feels like having my whole life essentially on the rails, and in the process, by the time I'm in my mid-20s, is a really foreign concept to me. I realized that walking in a circle in what was essentially the windiest area of the lakefront may not have been the best in terms of audio and visuals, but I still think that having a beautiful lakefront view on what is essentially also a pretty rare mid-October cold front here in Southwest Florida, just having something natural, nature-like, despite the houses and other man-made advents, also helps to reinforce the idea of the worlds that many Gen Z people live in feels ever more synthetic and fraudulent. And that's why we see a lot of people, myself included as well, returning to the idea of more natural, more organic, more authentic. In the past few years, of course, we've seen the greenwashing effect of a lot of fake organic, fake natural, and all that other stuff, which is a whole separate topic. But we're seeing a lot of people go back to pen and paper, just more conventional and traditional ways that a lot of people will think of as kind of archaic and old school. But to many other young people, it just kind of seems like the natural thing to go back to. That a lot of these screens and a lot of these tech features are nice and convenient, but growing up with them, we've taken them for granted and kind of become a little disenfranchised with a lot of these technological advents. They're cool and they may be unique to other people, but to a bunch of young people, they're kind of just the cut and dry, everyday, boring, soulless experience that we used to interface with everything from school to information to our social life. So going back to a way that many other generations essentially experienced everyday life as seems almost romantic and almost as an adventure. Putting down our phones to talk to somebody seems like a normal thing to do. It seems like the thing we should do. But to many other people, especially during the pandemic, who grew up with being behind a screen as the only way to do it, there's a certain novelty to face-to-face interaction, which is personally a little sad to say, but I'm overall very happy that a lot of young people are going back to more traditional, more grounded ways of interfacing with the world. To tie a lot of that concept in terms of menswear, I know I should have probably been wearing a suit for this video, but it's just such a gorgeous day that regardless of what I was wearing, I decided to be outside, get some nice vitamin D, and enjoy a very rare, windy, cool, but still sunny day in Florida, which may happen somewhat regularly in January and February, but for mid-October, where the next few days are still going to be in the mid-80s, being outside is very important to me. And for the topic of this video, you'll see a lot of people outside wearing athleisure, which is the everyday attire of the 2020s. Pretty much the 21st century is going to be dominated by this more casual, synthetic material, high stretch, high comfort, moisture wicking, and all this other materials. A gentleman walked past me wearing this suit, which hammers in the point. He's probably pledging for a fraternity, but I wanted to respect his privacy and not have him on camera because that would just be a little in his face. But dressing up in a more professional and formal manner is something I like to do, weather permitting, of course. I'm going to be outside for most of the day, so of course, fine worsted wool is not the best, regardless of how much I like it. It's just a fact that you kind of have to dress with the seasons. But we're noticing a lot more younger people are tending to take a lot of style aspects from conventional menswear. You know, some of the stylish and knitted polos are coming back. A lot of patterns in pants. More people are wearing pants. And that's a trend that as you get older, more people are going to have shorts more as the casual item. But we're seeing a lot of people go back to what their family members were wearing for every day. And that harkens back to, it just feels like people in their 20s, Gen Zers, it feels like we're both younger and older at the same time, which is a really bizarre dichotomy where it feels like we're behind, yet we're still ahead. We have all these resources and all these things that we use every day that other generations either didn't have or didn't have until they were much older. You know, advanced computers and a lot of other technology was not just a luxury, but it was something for professionals to have. Older people that already made their life, they needed these items to perform work and other everyday functions. But to a lot of Gen Zers, we are born with a phone in our hand, as a lot of other people will say. The wind really does pick up in certain areas, and that's going to be noticeable on camera. But a lot of the casual world that has been shaped by a post-COVID pandemic time, quite frankly, a lot of people, we just don't resonate with it. A life of comfort is something that people seek and many make their life's mission. But not having the struggles, not having the obstacles can be a little dull. And that's one of the reasons why I think anxiety and depression are high, because a lot of the achievements we have overcoming hardships, we simply don't have an opportunity to overcome those hardships, because as a modern society, we've tried so hard to eliminate discomfort and obstacles. So it kind of creates this world where it's kind of like the story of Goldilocks, except everything is too soft and too mushy and nothing is just right. We had this world that many perceived as too tough, too hard, you know, whatever adjective you want to use. We have gone to the opposite side of the scale, where a lot of things are too soft, too mushy. Our food we've designed so that we don't have to chew as hard, and that's why we have so many dental problems. And that's not really just a modern issue. That's a post-industrial revolution thing that's been happening for decades and centuries. So that's not just a modern thing that Gen Z has to deal with. That's a multi-generational thing that's not going to go away, and that's not any one person's fault. That's just, as a species, we've wanted to evolve a certain way, whether it's biologically feasible or not. We've willed it into existence. But a lot of people feel as though they look at their grandparents at the age of 25, they see them in, you know, what a lot of people would be wearing in the 50s and 40s and, you know, early 60s as well. For most of the 20th century, for most of human times, we've been wearing, you know, whatever's society deems as acceptable, whatever's cheap, whatever is comfortable. That's not a new concept. But when you look at a lot of, at least our grandparents, Gen Z's grandparents, so that might be baby boomers, might be silent generation, we look at a lot of that with their achievements, and wow, wind is really picking up. We see a lot of that, and we see our grandparents with multiple kids, maybe our parents. Some of them are in their mid to late 20s, and they have a stable job, they have a family, they're doing a lot of things that Gen Z and millennials, you know, going into their 30s feel like they're behind on, comparing themselves to that. A lot of people are nearing 30 and they feel like they're just now gaining a foothold in the professional workspace, where they compare a lot of older generations where by the time they were 30, most of them might have been on their second kid. So it's an issue that acknowledging it is really just one step in solving it. And I don't have the answers, nor do I expect a lot of other people to have the answers, but as the saying goes, the first step is acknowledging it. And I just think that looking at oneself, whether it's in the mirror or a conscious third-person view, is really helpful overall. I swear I didn't intentionally try to film this video in a wind tunnel, but that's just the way it is outside. But hopefully, some of the mini rant and jargon I was saying resonates with some of you, and I'm assuming many of you will relate as well to at least most of what I said, and that was mainly my intention, as to have a lot of people know that their feelings, their thoughts, their emotions, their modern existence, they're not alone in how they think and feel. And I definitely do think we'll see a lot of trends will come and go, but Gen Z will be shaped by the economic and cultural times of many people like myself, and I'm assuming many other people watching this, as you'll see this modern counterculture as a way of rejecting modernity and embracing tradition, as a lot of the memes go. And we're seeing that on a different scale that we've seen in the past, but hopefully you've enjoyed at least some of what I said and some of the pretty lake views, and of course the probably terrible wind. But I still encourage many people to go out and video journal, conventional journal, of course, a lot of how they think and feel at a given moment, because looking back, time will only tell. But I hope you enjoyed.